everyone. My name is Erin with the Cancer Support Community. To our webinar, Balancing Work and Cancer, which is hosted by the Cancer Support Community in partnership with Cancer and Careers, AIM at Melanoma, Melanoma Research Foundation, Melanoma International Foundation, and Melanoma Research Alliance. The program is sponsored by Merck. Just want to go over a couple of reminders before we get into the presentation. So today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website if you go to www.cancersupportcommunity.org/webinars. For the webinar, our presenters will be featured first, and then we will begin the question and answer session at the end. And I wanted to say thank you to those of you who did submit questions as part of the registration process. Please feel free, though, at any time to submit a question through the Q&A box, which is found on the right of your screen at any point during this presentation. However, we will wait until the end to answer your questions. This webinar, there will be an opportunity for you to participate in our post-webinar survey. So if you could just participate in that, that would be great, as your input is of great value to us. So just wanted to start by introducing the Cancer Support Community. We are an international nonprofit organization that provides social and emotional support to all people impacted by cancer. We have over 50 affiliates across the country, as well as satellite locations where anyone can go in and join in educational workshops, support programs, mind-body programs like yoga and Reiki. And then for those who do not have an affiliate in their region, we do have online programs and services which are available through our website. And our mission is to ensure that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by community. This is just a brief listing of some of the resources that we have available. If you have any questions or would like to talk to one of our call counselors, you can go, it's that first resource listed there, our Cancer Support Helpline, which you reach at 1-888-793-9355. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speakers, Brennan and Erin Youngerberg. Brennan is Associate Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers, where she oversees the organization's annual national conference, expanded regional conference program, and website. She brings to the job more than 2 decades of experience in communications, public relations, marketing, and event management. Previous roles include those of copy chief at both Self Magazine and LifetimeTV.com, marketing director at internationally renowned architecture firm Melanoma part of Wagener Edstrom Communications. On a corporate citizenship campaign for a global real estate client. She also spent 9 months in Kenya in 2003 to 2004, serving as a health education resource volunteer with the U.S. Peace Corps. Erin Youngerberg works as an industrial engineer. She was diagnosed with nodular melanoma in October 2010 at the age of 32. It was confirmed stage 4 in March 2011. Erin underwent 3 years of treatment, including 4 months on Zelboraf, 4 doses of Yervoy, and almost 2.5 years on Merck's anti-PD-1 treatment, Keytruda, all working full-time. Her skin continued to show nothing new or growing. In her time, Erin enjoys playing photography. So at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Christine.
Priya. Everyone, as Rhea said, my name is Brennan, and I'm very pleased to speak with all of you this evening about balancing work and cancer. First, I'm going to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Cancer and Careers. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a 14-year-old national nonprofit that educates and empowers working people with cancer. We do so by offering a host of resources, all of which are free. First and foremost is our website in both English and Spanish. Webinars, teleconferences, and publications on topics related to navigating a cancer diagnosis and employment. We host a national conference held annually in June in New York City for which travel scholarship opportunities are available, and 2 regional conferences, including one in Los Angeles coming up in November. I'm going to give everyone a broad overview of the topic and then direct you to some resources where you can get some more information. Okay. I'm going to advance.
Oh, no problem. If you just hit the user message.
I think, sorry everyone, you have to bear with me. So as we explore the topic of balancing work and cancer, inherent in that is what we at Cancer and Careers call the diagnosis work dilemma. Many of you are likely at a different place in this process. For some of you, maybe the early decisions have been made about whether or not to work, and perhaps you've even already corrected course a few times. Others of you are past the phase of determining whether to work through treatment and maybe on to determining whether it's time to get back to work. But we're going to start at the beginning and make our way through both phases. Hopefully some of this will resonate for some of you, and other parts of it will be new information. Thinking about whether to work through or soon after treatment, you need to look at the big picture and consider 2 key questions. 1, how important is work to you personally, and what exactly does that mean? And 2, what information do you need in order to make the best possible decision for yourself about whether or not to work? So I believe this is going to lead to even more questions, and many of you might find that the answers to those questions are in conflict with each other. At the end of them, hopefully, is a path. And it's just to recognize from the start that this question and potential conflict is a part of the whole process. So one of the first more drilled down questions is, how does treatment affect your work and your schedule? To get an appropriate answer, you'll want to work with all the members of your healthcare team who can help you determine how much time you'll need for surgery and treatment, or you can work the whole way through. Your providers can help you map out resulting periods of productivity and fatigue to help you determine if you can, schedule treatments around your work. So things to consider are, for example, are you feel the worst the day after a treatment? So then you won't get an appointment on a Friday, so you'll have Saturday to recover. If you learn you're likely to feel nauseous, let's say 3 days after treatment, you can schedule it earlier in the week so you can cope with any nausea or resulting side discomfort at home on the weekend. All this by way of saying that don't be afraid to ask for appointment times that work for you. What are your job demands, both physical and mental? And important to be realistic about the degree to which these demands might deplete your energy. So that's looking at your workday as not just being from the time you arrive at your job until the time you leave, but it goes into getting you to and from there. Because now that will require a certain amount of energy as well. So you really have to ask yourself if there maybe are new barriers to your commute. It's going to be uncomfortable to catch the bus or to drive in rush hour traffic. How hours, honestly, can you put in a day? Think about what other areas of life may require substantial energy and therefore need to be taken into account. So like cooking meals or helping kids with homework or tending to aging parents. Flexible is your work environment in terms of both hours and assignments. Accommodations be made in either area, and I'll discuss this in greater detail a little later. And question, what would be the impact on finances and health insurance if you were to take time off? The fact is that the Family and Medical Leave Act is unpaid, and core benefits are expensive. So actually, sometimes one of these elements, finances or insurance, becomes the deciding factor. Some of you, even though you might need to work for the income or medical coverage or both, it might be impossible given your particular diagnosis or treatment protocol. And the practical questions, you want to consider the way in which your identity is connected to your work. So for better or worse, in our culture, we tend to meet people for the first time and ask, what do you do? You know, rather than what are you eating or what's your favorite season? We tend to make value judgments about people based on how they spend their time. So the identity is deeply rooted in their job, and now feel that that part of them is being threatened. So not being able to answer the question, what kind of work do you do, can be very unsettling. Thing to consider is that a job can be a momentary escape from the cancer world, so to speak, and that can be really vital for many people. Think about whether your career priorities have changed. The reality is life-altering, so it's important to be mindful of that and allow yourself to reassess your priorities if you feel the need to do so. Answers to all of these questions, you'll have to do a lot of information gathering. And this graphic can be helpful in terms of outlining the kinds of information you need and how to organize it. Each area in greater detail over the next few slides. Communicating with your healthcare team about whether or not you want to work during or after treatment is really critical. If that you do want to work, then what's also critical is that you be very clear about the kind of work that you do, and what your day looks like, what your specific responsibilities are, and so forth. Are you at a desk typing on a computer all day? Or are you out and about making sales calls, interacting with people? You're a receptionist, so you sit a lot, but it's also your responsibility to change the water cooler. You're going to need to know that. About, what your office looks like. Space or a small space. Is it empty? Is it on the 4th floor of an old building with no elevator? All details are important for your healthcare team to understand about your situation in order to determine if you actually could work through the kind of treatment they're planning and the possible side effects, or it could work during the recovery period. Through how much time off you might need and what you want to ask for. Again, your care providers can be real allies in this process, but you have to speak up. If you know that you want to work during treatment or go back to work as soon as possible after surgery, let's say, then won't be able to factor that in as they plan your treatment protocol and schedule. So one source of information that people often overlook as they pull together what to do to make this decision for navigating working cancer is their employer. So for you who are currently working, you want to review all of your benefits information, not just your health insurance. So take a look at sick time policies and any other flexible work options, such as telecommuting or accessing a leave bank. Do you have access to any types of paid leave or insurance? In an employee handbook at some point, now's the time to unearth it and see if any of these options exist for you. All organizations offer such policies, but that also doesn't mean that they can't be provided. And where you work doesn't have a formal handbook, you're still going to want to do some finding to see what's in place already, or what's been done for other employees informally. So in very general terms about employment rights. It's important to remember that what I'm sharing is only basic information to get you started. So I have listed some resources at the end of the presentation which you can access for more information. And I also strongly encourage you to speak with someone trained in the legal issues of cancer survivors about your specific concerns. In general, places you can look for information on possible protections or coverage include the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a federal law, state's fair employment laws, and your particular employment contract. As I said, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law. It applies to private employers with 15 or more employees. It's possible that there's a state law that's more protective of you, so you should check the laws of your particular state as well as the ADA. Excuse me. Someone seeking to use the law must be qualified for the job and have a disability under the ADA. To note is that in this case, the word disability is a legal term and defined in a specific way for this particular law. For text will have their own definition of disability, so it isn't universal. But I strongly suggest you speak with a legal professional to determine if you're both qualified and have a disability under the ADA's definition. The two key things that the ADA may provide are protection against discrimination in the workplace at all stages of employment, so from interviews through being on staff. And it also may provide access to reasonable accommodations, which I'll talk about in a bit. So one of the questions we get asked the most at Cancer and Careers is whether it's necessary to disclose your diagnosis to your employer. The answer is you are not required by law to share your diagnosis at work at any point in time. However, it may be necessary to do so if, for example, you're trying to use the ADA to access reasonable accommodation. That said, in some instances, the entire diagnosis need not be disclosed. Just enough information to satisfy meeting the requirements of the law. If you decide to work during treatment, the next decision is whether to tell your employer and or others at work. Major things to consider overall here are how treatment interfere with your ability to perform your duties, and what legal benefits are there to sharing this information. For example, one reason to disclose is to get access to reasonable accommodations. And again, I'll talk more about this in a bit. After those two questions, think through your work environment and culture. Safe and flexible environment. If so, then you might feel comfortable telling people early on and disclosing everything. If it's more corporate, formal, then maybe you're going to decide to tell only if necessary and then just the facts. If you're sure, try asking yourself the following. For example, how long have you been employed at the company? Who's been someplace for 5 years versus 3 months will know more and likely have deeper relationships with colleagues. This is part of the strategic thinking around how you're going to ask for things and what you're going to ask for. It will affect what you're entitled to. What are your work relationships like? You work a close-knit staff. You work with people that have a real team mentality and you do a lot of group work. Is it the kind of culture where everyone comes in on Monday morning and shares what they did over the weekend? Or do you not really socialize with each other or share personal information? How has your work performance been up until this point? Be candid with yourself on this one, because if you've had poor performance reviews, it might become an obstacle when trying to get workplace support. In the past, you've always had stellar reviews, and now you're a little concerned that with everything you're up against, your job performance may suffer. Then closing your situation may actually help explain the disparity. I want to think about how others in similar situations in our organization have been treated. And keep in mind that the similar situation need not be cancer. It could be that a colleague went on maternity leave or took time off to care for their parents. And regardless of other particular circumstances, really what you want to think about is, was the company flexible? Policies such as donated vacation time that made it easier for the employee. If yes, that's going to be a good sign that the culture is very positive. Next, you need to explore your own personality and feelings around your diagnosis. So if you're outgoing by nature, then you may choose to be very open and forthcoming. If you're private, then you may have to tell only necessary. The real important thing here is to be true to yourself and know that everyone reacts differently to a diagnosis. If you share the information, the next challenge is deciding whom to tell. I recommend starting with whomever you're most comfortable with, especially since the first conversation can often be the hardest. The supervisor is an obvious possibility, since they're usually the one you work most closely with, and can also be an ally and an advocate for you within the company. But it's not the case for everyone, so if you don't feel comfortable discussing private matters with your supervisor, then your human resources department can be another good place to start, if they has one. Comprehensive knowledge of company policy and benefits, as well as their experience with other employees who have gone through something similar, can make them a great resource for information. But besides to consult HR, it's important to remember that research department serves two functions. First, they're there to help you understand your benefits and company policies, but at the same time, they're there to protect the company. And want to share your news with colleagues. The best approach is to just let them know what to expect. For example, if you're likely to get really fatigued or lose your hair or whatever. Then alleviate their concerns. Focus the conversation on how you plan to cope and get your work done. People are getting their cues from you on how to handle the situation. So if you seem to have it all under control, your colleagues will likely react accordingly. For all of these conversations, make sure to prepare beforehand. So they're comfortable explaining your diagnosis and your treatment schedule and the effect that it's going to have on your work. Things are fluid and can change. So you want to emphasize that this is what you know today, and that as things evolve, you and your employer can work together to make sure you're okay and that their needs are being met. If possible, have a plan of action ready. How to handle the work, when you're out and for how long, what's the best way for colleagues to reach you when you're not in the office, who's going to cover your workload, and any other details that are going to make the process easier for everyone. Create a plan. You're your boss that you're considering the team as well as yourself. And thinking ahead, you're going to make it easier for your company to see how all of this can work. There are some circumstances in which having a plan in place just isn't going to be possible, but if you have time to at least outline some recommendations, then that can be really helpful. So people with cancer, social media has become a valuable component of survivorship, because it can provide immediate support and a sense of community. But there are things about it that you want to consider, especially if you aren't planning to disclose your cancer diagnosis at work, but you are talking about it online, Facebook or a blog, or some of those lines. It's important to know, first of all, that employers often Google candidates, and not necessarily to find something negative about them, but rather to see what comes up and to see if your resume matches your online footprint. It's like a tool to help them learn about prospective employees. But of course, is that the online space is also a place where information becomes available about people that those individuals didn't necessarily intend to share with the potential boss or company. So there you want to make sure you know what comes up about yourself. If you've already done so, as you Google yourself, and do it from a different computer or browser than what you normally use, because you'll get different results. So this is up in the first few pages. This you can be prepared for questions or comments that may arise. It's also really important to think about which, what you're saying on the social media channels you use. And it's also critically important to set your privacy accordingly. Even though we may think certain sites are more private than others, the fact is that none of them are really all that private. There are sites designed for support that have a high level of privacy and security, just My Lifeline and Caring Bridge, which you may be familiar with. But those, you need to check your settings. Because in the spaces where you feel somewhat protected, where you've invited people in and they've invited you in, and you have agreement to be connected there and so forth, it doesn't mean that things are ironclad. Also want to consider your relationship to the larger cancer community. For example, if you volunteer with a cancer-related organization. You're okay with disclosing that information, but the fact that you're a survivor, and that's fine. You can still mention the affiliation. You just want to give careful thought to the language you use when you reference your involvement. Regardless of which social media sites you're on, you need to be very specific with your community about what you do and don't want to share publicly. At least when I say community, I mean both your online community as well as your friends and family, because you may not be connected with some of them online. So you make sure that they're not broadcasting information you hadn't intended to share publicly. A key driver in all of this is the fact that the internet doesn't go away. It's important that you consider things not just in terms of the immediate moment, but also in terms of what the long-term ramifications may be. So you're in a situation now in which your boss and coworkers are great and really supportive. But about a few years from now, when you have a new supervisor who is less great, maybe, and is now Googling her new staff. So the bottom line is be mindful about your choices. It's critical to prepare yourself for the potential side effects of your treatment so you can manage them as well as possible at work. To get a general sense from your healthcare team of what those side effects are likely to be, and then discuss them more specifically in the context of work and your particular job. It's important both as part of the decision about whether working during treatment is feasible for you, and in an ongoing way as you go through it and face the challenges of managing things like pain and fatigue and chemo and other side effects. Or I should say, particularly the ones that are more visible. If you have changes in your weight or your skin or you lose your hair. But one of the side effects we hear most often about from patients is chemo brain. And unfortunately, there's no magic pill that's going to eliminate that side. But in a minute, I will discuss practical ways to help you maintain focus at work, which could help. The effect of visible physical changes really can't be underestimated, especially when you're working through treatment. So if you are going to be losing weight or gaining weight, you want to wear clothes that fit your body now. Clothes that are ill-fitting can be a constant reminder for both you and the people around you of what you're going through. And this will be particularly important if you're trying to keep your diagnosis completely or mostly private. You're going to have to think about how you're going to handle your colleagues' reactions to these changes. In situations like this, a social worker can be a terrific resource for helping you manage your response to other people's reactions. So I just mentioned one of the major workplace challenges we hear about and get asked about at Cancer and Career is concentrate and stay focused. And some recommendations, which really are all about getting back to basics and quieting the noise in this very overstimulated world of ours, are for tasking. You want a list of priorities, and then off your email or phone and notifications and so forth, and try to focus on one thing at a time. it really helps to write everything down. That way, if you forget it, you'll have a visible, tangible record. Consider keeping one notebook with you, with all your to-dos, and with you wherever you go. That way, you won't show up for, let's say, a client meeting with your grocery list in your hand. Rehearse everything. Presentations to project updates, even calls are good to rehearse. Also, think about banning any clutter in your work area. You really want to clear your space. And then simple things like remembering to breathe. Trying a break with a few deep breaths, that can help you refocus, or take a walk around the office or around the block. Shared your diagnosis is to identify a point person at work you trust, who's willing to be a centralized source of information about you, your health, and your schedule. You from having to constantly update everyone on how you're feeling. He or she can also be your go-to person for finding out what's happening at the office. The last bullet point here is the hardest, I think, for all of us, really. But this is a time when it's imperative that you're honest with yourself about your limitations. You need to try to set appropriate boundaries for what you can and can't do and stick to them. This is actually another area where social workers in particular can be really helpful, both in terms of getting to recognize your trigger points so you can manage them before it's too late, and in terms of providing productive, professional ways to express your needs and limits. So, I'm finally going to talk about reasonable accommodations. Should your employer be bound by the law, and should you be qualified and have a disability under the ADA? One key benefits of the ADA's protection is the ability to request what's called a reasonable accommodation. And that is any change in the work environment or in the way things are customarily done that enables an individual with a disability to enjoy equal employment opportunities. So often about environmental challenges at work is the best way to talk about some possible accommodations. For example, is of a social worker who was going through cancer treatment and was nauseous all the time at work. That in and of itself wasn't necessarily an impossible side effect to deal with, but still was problematic in that it made it very hard for her to do her job because she felt so sick to her stomach. But what's interesting was that she began to notice she wasn't nauseous at home and she wasn't nauseous during the same working hours on the weekends. So it was strange that she felt so sick at work specifically. Through conversations, it became clear to her that she was nauseous at work because her office was next to the cafeteria. So the patient was to change offices. Ultimately, it didn't mean that going through treatment became a breeze for her, but it definitely changed the quality of her work life. And her working was vital to her emotional and psychological well-being. For me, something simple like setting up your workspace to avoid expending unnecessary energy. If you sit at a desk, you want to put your phone, your files, your printer, etc., all within easy reach. If a chair is going to be more comfortable, bring one in, or bring a backrest or a pillow or whatever it is that you need. Think about how you can make your workplace more comfortable and productive, then modify it as it is. What I want to give some thought to is how to make your work schedule more manageable. The options I'm going to mention is one size fits all, but they may get you thinking more specifically about your own situation. For example, can you work from home part-time or full-time? Telecommuting, as everyone calls it, is quite common, and it's like not an option if you are a surgeon or a bus driver. But those who are able to work remotely, doing so can eliminate a draining commute or enable you to lie down if you need to, and things of that nature. Maybe you can work full-time, but you work a flexible schedule, whereby you continue to work hours, but you vary the start and end time of your workday. Take time out as needed to go to appointments, then make it up by working later that day or later in the week. So ultimately, as I said, you work the same number of hours, they're just distributed differently. It includes allocated break time. Is it possible for you to take additional breaks? For instance, you're entitled to 2 breaks and a 45-minute lunch, but what we're trying to find is that you really need a total of 4 breaks in your day. So getting extra breaks could be considered an accommodation. With any of these suggestions, it's going to depend on the kind of job you have. A security guard, for example, won't be able to telecommute, but the trick is to be both creative and logical when you present your solutions to your employer. So there are options. The technology might be an accommodation, something like speak-type software that provides relief from using the computer. Or company might use a particular policy as an accommodation. In the case of a grocery store cashier who we heard about, who was attending one of our events, who needed to stay hydrated and get off her feet from time to time. So she was allowed to use a stool and have a beverage at her register. And they typically were not permitted to cashiers. So it was a fairly small policy change that the company made, but it allowed this woman to stay on the job. The possibility would be to shift a non-essential portion of someone's job. So earlier, an accommodation has to be reasonable and allow for the person to do the essential functions of his or her job. For example, a second-grade teacher obviously can't telecommute. He needs to be in the classroom to perform the essential functions of his job. That is, teaching the required subject, specific number of hours per day, and so forth. But let's say he suffers from fatigue, and part of the job is lunch and recess duty. Maybe those components aren't considered essential, and an accommodation can be made for him to have a coworker take over lunch and recess duty, allowing this guy to rest during those periods and focus on classroom preparation. Lastly, and probably the least common, is someone could move to another open position at the company if one existed. That would be considered an accommodation. But the important thing to know here is that an employer is not obligated to create a new job for someone as an accommodation. An appropriate position must already exist and be open. Again, these examples are meant to help you start thinking about accommodations and also to remove some of the myths around the concept, such as that accommodations are expensive or that they're unlikely to be approved. The fact is that most accommodations cost nothing, or they cost an employer $500 or less. So you want to be creative and really think about your environment and what might be causing any challenges you're having. Accommodations may evolve over time. What you need at the start of treatment could look very different from what you need in the middle of it, and so forth. I'm going to shift gears a little and talk about returning to work. So first to your former job, and then to a new employer. So the benefit of returning to a place you've worked before is that you know the players, you know the routine, and you know what to expect. Still, it's important to think through what that first day, that first week, even that first month might be like, and you kind of easing back into the routine. Just tell your healthcare team how the side effects impact your comfort and your confidence. You may think about ways you can integrate flexibility in terms of both tasks and time. But if you decide to do that, be sure to think through and think how you want to articulate what it is you need before approaching your company to ask for it. So a mistake employees often make is not addressing the business concerns of the company when asking for support. You want to be sure to present what you need in a way that's going to resonate for your employer. The downside of returning to an existing job is the possibility of being seen as, quote, the cancer person at the office, if that's, in fact, how you became the most well-known. We hear from a lot of survivors who are concerned about being branded that way. And people also worry that their colleagues are going to assume they can't do their job in the same capacity as they did before. You're grappling with, which a lot of people do, the best thing really is to prove your coworkers wrong. But be careful to do so without running yourself into the ground. It also might help to spend time reflecting on your past accomplishments before you go back to work. And that can really help boost your confidence, Let's see. There we go. So the thing to think about is that while people mean well, sometimes they say things that aren't particularly helpful. And I know some of you have experienced that. It's not that they're trying to offend you, but rather they're really trying to identify with your situation in some way. So they say something like, you know, my uncle had cancer too. And you, understandably, could find a bit off-putting. So in those instances, you want to take a cancer-related comment and redirect the conversation back to the topic of work. We like to call this swivel, and it goes something like this. So in response to a comment such as, my uncle had cancer too, you might say, I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been hard for him. But while you're here, do you have time to talk about next week's client meeting? Being able to shift the conversation back to a place where you feel comfortable is going to be empowering. It's going to help reset the view your colleagues might have of you. So it takes some time to recast yourself in their eyes, but as I said earlier, people are likely to follow your lead. So the more you focus on work, the more they will too. In a few minutes, I'm going to focus on the job search process, which hopefully will be helpful for any of you who are currently looking for work. According to one of our professional coaches who we work with, more than 85% of jobs are found through other people versus through job boards or headhunters or ads. It really goes without saying that networking is a necessary part of the job hunting process, and you have to be willing to do it. There are great online sources for this, such as LinkedIn. One of the things that's true about LinkedIn is that even for those who are new to the workforce and may feel as if they're a bit short on experience, there are ways to create a strong network by connecting with former classmates and professors, listing internships or work study programs, your volunteer gigs. All those are things you want to do. LinkedIn is also a great way to find out about possible job opportunities. And it's a great way for potential employers to find out about you. Here are some tips for getting the most out of LinkedIn, like writing a compelling profile and so forth. But as I said, you have to devote some energy to it. And what you want to remember when thinking about your network is don't think too narrowly. And what I mean by that is your network doesn't include only those people in your professional sphere. The thing you know is a potential connection. Your friends and neighbors, your accountants, people in your faith community. Consider anyone and everyone. People looking for work are going to need a resume that they can use to apply for certain jobs and to take an interview. Make sure your resume is concise, that it's easy to read and understand, and focused on your career goal. What you don't want your resume to be is an exhaustive list of every task you've had work-wise. The rule of thumb is 1 page for early career and 2 pages for someone more seasoned. Also helps to know that there's more than one type of resume. So the most common is the chronological resume, which I'm sure you've all seen, which takes the reader through a candidate's work experience by job, beginning with the most recent. But there's also something called the chronological functional resume, which is more of a hybrid and could be preferable for someone who has several gaps in their work history. Because that type of resume, that version, highlights skills and accomplishments up top and specific job experience lower down. Cancer Careers offers a free resume review service. You send a resume and a career coach provides specific feedback for you. You can details about that on our website. Vitally important is the cover letter or cover email. Along with your resume, that's going to be the thing that helps get you in the door. And what you want to remember about a cover letter is it shouldn't be simply a regurgitation of your resume. Rather, it's really an opportunity to use prose to tell in your capabilities to the specific job and company you're going after. A lot of people ask us if they should include their cancer experience in their resume or in their cover letter, either as a positive or as an explanation of some sort. My response to that is do whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, it really comes down to a gut check. Think about it this way. Do you know anyone who shares their health history in a cover letter? The goal of the cover letter and resume are to get you an interview. So in that sense, your diagnosis and treatment aren't really part of that conversation. Think about the fact that if you offer up information about your diagnosis in a letter, you won't physically be there when the employer initially absorbs that information. You can't explain anything or answer any questions they may have. We have a job search toolkit, Cancer and Careers does, which you can download for free on our website. It has a bunch of helpful information on cover letters and resumes and interviewing and so forth. You may want to check that out. So the resume, a lot of people are concerned that during a job interview, they'll ask to explain the gap in their work history. Technically, employers are not allowed to ask about your health, but of course that doesn't mean that they won't. So in the initial stages of a job search, yes, you should be prepared for questions related to breaks on your resume. But one of the upsides to the economic woes of 2008 and beyond is that employers today are used to seeing gaps on people's resumes for various reasons. So it's really not as if an interviewer will automatically say, you know, I see a gap here, and think that that means that you had a health issue. In fact, it's possible they won't even ask about it, but you still want to be prepared. And if it comes up, you want to be future-focused, non-specific, and brief. It also helps to use swivel, which I mentioned earlier, talking about reintegrating into the workplace. In this scenario, you want to have an answer when someone says, I see you have a gap on your resume, can you tell me about that? You should both acknowledge the question and then swivel back to focus job opportunity, to your desire to get hired, the skills you bring to the table, and so forth. And what's key here is that you have the and part ready to go. That way, you're going to eliminate the chance for a pause in the conversation and eliminate the chance for a possible follow-up question. Figuring this out, you're really going to need to determine what feels authentic and comfortable for you, and want to practice your swivel again and again. Now back, I talked about Google and what you want to be aware of when participating in the online space. Now we're going to talk briefly about one of the upsides of Google. I mean, a lot of upsides of Google, but one of the key ones for our purposes here is that you can use it to research a prospective employer, and you really should. Want to find out as much as possible about a company before you meet with them. If your interview is a result of having networked with someone out there, then you probably already have a sense of what it's like to work there. You want to search for additional information, such as, is the company well regarded, or have there been any discrimination lawsuits? And also research how many people there are on staff, because that number will be a factor in determining your access to reasonable accommodations. Things about starting a new job with a new employer is just that it's a fresh start. There's no pre-existing cancer identity, so to speak of. You choose if and when you want to share that information. The flip side of working somewhere new is that it's not a known quantity, so you're not exactly sure what to expect, which definitely can be a challenge. Research shows that your first 90 days in a new job are critical in terms of setting yourself up to succeed. It's the period when you're meeting and assessing new people, you're learning the culture and new processes, and you're trying to manage your energy. Well, it's not imperative that you work a ton of hours. Instead, you want to focus on creating a simple plan for the things I just mentioned. And when it feels overwhelming, break everything down into small pieces. You're going to need to learn and understand what it means to be successful in your new job. But it also really helps to remember that every company is a bit dysfunctional. And also keep in mind that no one hires a new employee hoping they're going to fail. They come with the intention of supporting their success. Above all, you want to take care of yourself physically and mentally and keep reminding yourself of past accomplishments. Wrapping up, I briefly want to tell you about a few upcoming Cancer and Careers events. One is our series of webinars on balancing work and cancer, the next of which is on September 23rd, and it focuses on disclosure. Privacy in your online brand is the title. Then there's one on December 9th on job search with our long-term career coaches, Julie Jackson. Coming up in November is our first West Coast conference, which is being held in LA on Friday, November 13th. Remember that all of our events, resources, materials are free, including our resume review service and our publications. And you can get more information and register for all of our events by going to our website. And just briefly here, I've listed additional resources that may be helpful, including links to specific pages on the Department of Labor and Social Security Administration websites, etc. I just want to list my contact information. So that you are welcome to contact me or anyone at the Cancer and Careers on Cancer and Careers staff at any point. We would love to help in any way we can, and hope this will just be the beginning of a larger dialogue. So I'm really honored to have been here and share this information with all of you. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Erin.
All right, thank you. The information that Christy covered is shown for me with a lot of the things that I've dealt with over the last 4 to 5 years, and a lot of familiar things that I went through and I thought about as I'm going through balancing cancer diagnosis and my career. In 2010, I was in the middle of making a job change from the North Carolina area to New York City area. The day that I signed from my job in North Carolina, I actually had a hole in my upper right back that was bothering me. I went into the dermatologist. I remember the nurse saying it looked angry, but the dermatologist said it was nothing to worry about, and in about 2 weeks, I got a letter from the mail saying it was nothing to worry about and everything was cleared. So about planning my job change and kind of forgot about it. Not for very long. About days later, the dermatologist called and asked me to come into her office. I'm sure of the attendees on here can remember what that's like. She told me that it was nodular melanoma. My first concern, being the responsible side of me, was that I quit my job. And about insurance, how will I cover that? Secondly, I was making a fairly big job change, would my company still hire me? Given that I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be facing and what I'd be through. Fortunately for me, the company that I was starting with in the New York City area was very understanding. They were okay with me pushing back start dates while I got a couple of different surgeries and tests done, and I was very, very fortunate for that. Even to the point where, again, open, having some discussions, they were trying to figure out how to speed up my insurance started so that I could minimize the gap between the two jobs. Just based on the job, I think a lot of these were talked about in the previous slides. For me, one of the big things was telling coworkers. I think I did a couple of different ways. If I was at North Carolina, it was I knew those folks much longer. It would have been easier, I think, to share the information, but I was starting a brand new job with people I didn't know in a city I'd never lived in before. So I took to limit who I told. I really just talked to HR and then my boss and one other coworker that I worked with very closely. I think for me at the time, I didn't want to be viewed, and I think I mentioned this before, I didn't want to be viewed as the cancer patient, especially being the new person in the office, because I think I'm still trying to prove who I was, what I was capable of. I didn't want that to cloud my skills and capabilities. But that over time, I was with the company almost 4 years, and I think I learned along the way was not open and telling people. It's difficult sometimes. I think in the beginning, I wasn't ready to share it with a lot of folks because it was just hard for me to discuss emotionally because I was still trying to digest it. But not telling folks, there were times where I had to be off for surgery, I had to be off for appointments, in a clinical trial where I was in every 3 weeks. So I think some coworkers not knowing probably question sometimes about why did I spend so much time working from home, or why was I out of the office? Even the point, this was kind of discussed in one of the other slides, been out for 5 weeks. I had to have a small bowel resection and a fair amount of weight. And I came back in, and I remember one of my coworkers that didn't know came up to me and was asking me some questions and stops and looks at me and asked if I had been on a starvation diet. I realized how much weight had changed, but obviously was fairly visible to my coworkers. That they didn't know made it a bit uncomfortable sometimes. Other challenges that I faced too was taking time for me. I was in the middle of starting a new job. I tend to be a bit of a workaholic sometimes. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, to the point where there were times when I could ask recovery time to get back to work and to do things. That was the right decision or not. I'm sure I had my doctor's approval on that. But maybe if they'd pushed me a little bit harder, I would have taken more time for myself. But again, I was starting a new job, and I didn't want to reflect poorly on me, whether that was the right decision at the time or not. Who knows? But even to the point when I started the new job, I actually still had the JP drain my armpit, which is some interesting conversations trying to fly with that and get through security. But an interesting one with starting a new job is that that meant I couldn't drive. So my sister actually traveled with me and drive me to and from my new job, and also help wash my hair and things like that. So it was a little bit of a weird transition, and those were some of the challenges that I faced in my own diagnosis. I'm going to advance the slide. Okay. So how I've coped and managed last 4 to 5 years. I think I've learned a lot from when I was first diagnosed to dealing with now. Again, a lot of the information that was presented in the earlier slides is things, resources that I've looked at and leaned on with dealing with this too. One, I think I've learned to be more open about my treatment and my situation. Originally, it was just even with sharing with friends and family, because I limited balance in that too. But the things that was mentioned before too about social media is that if I wasn't sharing it, didn't mean that my family and friends weren't sharing it with other people. So I thought it was easier to be therapeutic to what I was going through and answer the questions that people have. Secondly, also learning, and I'm still learning to do this, is being more open with some of my coworkers. I think I'm finally at a point now where I really get fairly emotional. It was hard to talk about because you're dealing with what you've just been presented with, what it means for you, what I'm going to have to go through to fight it. Now I can talk about it more openly. I've gotten to a point where, I've done a fair amount of treatments, I've had great results. It's easier for me to talk about. The other that, going back to the social media and what people can doubt about you, an example for me is with my job coworkers I hadn't shared with. I actually did an interview with the New York Post, and I found out how many of my coworkers read that because the next day I had a number of folks come up to me saying that they had seen the articles. And also interested why I hadn't shared the information with them because they would have been fairly supportive. And one of the things that I've learned is to make sure to have time for me. Work-life balance is important. I don't feel that I'm as much of a workaholic as I used to be. Make sure that in ways to help manage stress. I even switched company and jobs to have a better balance in work life, and also just to have less stress because we have what we're already dealing with. And that's kind of my career wants and goals. I've been a fairly ambitious way in what I wanted to do, but I've also realized that having balance is more important. Because if we don't have our health, what good are we as an employee? I really want to make sure that I use all my vacation each year, because I was in the past to not use all my vacation and choose work instead. Again, as mentioned, we have enough stress when we're going through this in our lives, so it's important to make sure that the job isn't adding more to that. Me, a lot of people struggle with, do you continue to work? Do you take time off? I know I've gone through that cycle of emotions a number of times. Working when I was first diagnosed, my as I would move home, I chose to keep working because I want cancer to define who I was. For me, it helped. It gave me another distraction. It might have made my performance suffer a little bit now and then. I also think it was good to have something to focus on and to have goals and that balance between, just with dealing with cancer. And I'm very lucky to have a boss and company that was very flexible with my time off for appointments. I did a clinical trial for 2.5 years where I had to go in every 3 weeks. I'm very flexible with letting me work from home or remotely. And I thought one of the things I've learned is being a little more open. I think generally you'll find that a lot of companies are very flexible with your work environment and then also your treatments. We live, again, it depends on your type of job, but I think we live in an environment where a lot of things can be done remotely. I think if you're open and address that, find that there's a lot of flexibility. Quickly, what my experiences have been, so I will turn it over.
Great. Thank you, Erin, for sharing your experience with us, and thank you, Chrissy, for sharing all that valuable information with us. At this point, I would like to open it up to the audience. So if you have any questions for us, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box on the right of your screen. Please give us just a couple of minutes as we just poll and wait for some questions to come in. So we have some questions for you. So our first question is,
I leave my job role for an extended period of time due to my cancer or treatment. Can my job give that position away, or would it still be my position upon my return?
That's a good question, and it's certainly one that we get often enough. preface my answer by saying, we field a number of leads at Intern Careers. I myself am not an attorney, so as mentioned in my presentation, it's really important to consult someone who is an expert in the field of cancer survivor issues and issues related to work, and you'll be sure you're getting the accurate information. It also, there's a lot of factors to determine that. It depends on how many employees there are, what your state, the state laws are, and so forth. So, for sure. But what I would say is that, it depends. It depends on whether you've given them information, as I indicated earlier. It depends on how much you disclose. If you disclose that you are going through treatment or you have a diagnosis, then clearly you're not able to dispute or give your job away for that reason. But again, I really hesitate to give any specific advice. Instead, I would refer you to some resources that we utilize a lot. There's a terrific organization, Triage Cancer, and they're a nonprofit that provides information about survivorship issues, and they have a resource page with lists of legal, insurance, and employment resources. The National Cancer Legal Services Network is another great organization, and we have those websites listed, links to those resources listed on our website, or you could go, for example, directly to their site, triagecancer.org, or National Cancer Legal Services Network is nclsn.org. So I think some of it is going to depend on your job and where you live and whether your employer is bound by the law, the federal law, based on the number of employees, or whatever state laws may be affected by.
Great, thank you, Chrissy. We have another question here. You talked a little bit about reasonable accommodations, but we have one about a specific, so do you just want to?
Yeah, sure. What are examples of reasonable accommodations in the workplace for someone who's receiving infusions every 3 weeks?
Someone who, what? What was the last part? I'm sorry.
Receiving infusions every 3 weeks.
Every week, and they're receiving it in the office? They need to leave, and a reasonable accommodation to, in effect, accommodate the fact that they need to receive infusions every week. Again, it's very hard to give a definitive answer because it depends what type of job, what type of office, the schedule, and so forth. But off the top of my head, something I would consider is a reasonable accommodation would be some type of adjustment in the schedule that you have so that you could take time off. I mean, it depends how long the infusion takes, what the recovery time is after that. So I'm sorry that I can't be more specific, but it really, every case is unique. So you need to, again, I would actually just refer you to the same organizations, the National Cancer Legal Services Network. Advocate Foundation is another one, Triage Cancer, certainly, which I mentioned before. They are well-versed in laws, including, the Americans with Disabilities Act and so forth, and what that treatment would be entitled to, because it's just really hard to speculate not knowing the specifics of their job and their employment situation.
Okay, thank you. So that is all of the questions that we have for today. So thank you, everyone, for participating. At this time, I would just like to thank for their enthusiasm and questions that have contributed to making today's webinar a success. If you would like more detailed information, please feel free to visit the Cancer Support Community website or call our helpline at 1-888-793-9355. I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers, Christine, Brennan, and Erin Youngerberg, for contributing their time and for sharing this important information with us. We would also like to thank our program partners, AIM at Melanoma, Melanoma Research Foundation, Melanoma International Foundation, Melanoma Research Alliance, and Cancer and Careers. And we'd also like to thank our program sponsor, Merck. Feel free to take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey, which you will be automatically redirected to at the end of this webinar. We appreciate any feedback that you may have. And have a great evening.